The evening light spilled over the mesas in slow bruises of gold and violet, as if the sun itself were reluctant to abandon the desert. A hawk circled far above, its shadow skimming over the brittle grass and weather-gnarled fence posts. Jedediah Boone watched from the porch of his ranch, pipe smoldering between his fingers, his breath rising in faint clouds that mingled with the wood smoke curling from his chimney. His house stood lonely against the horizon, its timbers creaking with the wind, the silence inside more suffocating than any storm. He had built it long ago with hands blistered and young, yet now it seemed less a home than a tomb he had not the courage to leave. The world had long since turned its back on him, and perhaps he had done the same. Jed's name in Silver Mesa was spoken like a warning. Children crossed the street when they saw him, as if the leather of his coat still carried the stench of blood from battles they were too young to remember. The townsfolk called him half-wild, whispered that his mind was no longer fit for company. Yet none of them knew the weight he carried, the nights he woke to the screams of men long dead, the face of a woman he once loved flickering like a candle he could not touch. He had been brave once, or foolish, depending on who told the tale. Now he was merely a shadow, a relic of dust and regret. Still, he clung to his routine. Each morning he saddled no horse, for there was no need. His cattle had dwindled, his fields went untended. He rose simply to greet the silence, to sip the bitter coffee that boiled too long on his stove, to sit in the rocking chair that faced nothing but the open expanse. It was easier to be still than to remember. Easier to forget himself than to face what waited in his own heart. Yet loneliness is a cruel companion. It scratches at the walls, gnaws at the bones. Jed told himself he had chosen this life, that the world had no place left for men like him. But there were evenings, like this one, when he caught himself staring at the empty chair across the table, almost speaking aloud before remembering no one was there to answer. The echo of silence was worse than judgment. It was worse than hate. On such nights, he often drank, though the whiskey offered no mercy. It only sharpened the faces of the lost, until he slammed the glass down and swore at shadows. He had grown used to the ache, convinced it would be his only company until the day the desert claimed him. And perhaps he would have been right, if not for the sound that came that night, faint but certain. A knock. Soft. Hesitant. Like the past itself, asking permission to enter. Jed stiffened in his chair. No one came to his door. The few times riders passed, they never slowed. His heart thudded with suspicion. He reached instinctively for the rifle propped against the wall, its wood worn smooth by years of use. Moving to the door, he pressed his ear to the silence beyond. Again, the knock came, gentle, but urgent enough to make his palms sweat. He pulled the door open in one swift motion, the barrel of his rifle rising as he squinted into the fading light. 5 women stood before him. Their clothes carried the dust of miles, shawls torn, faces shadowed by exhaustion. The wind tugged at their hair, dark and braided, streaked with ash and grief. They did not flinch at the sight of his weapon, though their eyes betrayed the weight of hunger and despair. One of them, tall and sharp-eyed, stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but her words were steady. "We seek shelter," she said. Jed's gaze swept over them, his breath caught in the throat. Their features marked them unmistakably, Apache. The blood of his old enemies. His jaw tightened, memories flaring, gunfire, smoke, cries in the night. His first instinct was to slam the door. But then his eyes caught the tremor in their hands, the hollow curve of their cheeks, the way they stood together as if clinging to the last fragment of hope. The woman who had spoken, her name, she said, was Nayeli, did not lower her gaze. Her dignity remained intact despite the dust on her skin. Behind her, the others shifted uneasily. Jed's eyes flicked to each in turn, Tiva, fiery in her suspicion, Ayoka, whose silence seemed carved from sorrow, Onao, watchful, her dark eyes holding secrets, Zoltana, the youngest, who looked as though hope still lingered faintly in her chest. Widows, Nayeli explained. Each had lost her husband to violence, some to soldiers, some to raiders, some to the endless feuds that scarred the land. Their own people had cast them aside, seeing them as burdens. The settlers in nearby towns would give them no quarter. They had walked for days, following only rumor of an old ranch at the edge of the mesa. Jed listened, his knuckles white on the rifle. His heart warred with itself. Every voice in his head told him to refuse them, to send them back into the night. He had no room, no strength, no wish for company. Worse, what would the town say if they discovered Apache widows under his roof? The scorn he already endured would turn to fury. He imagined the sheriff's eyes narrowing, the neighbors' whispers curdling into hatred. And yet, in the lines of their faces, he saw something he recognized too well. Not enemies. Not strangers. Exiles. Souls cast aside by the world, bearing the same invisible wound he carried. Loneliness. Loss. A yearning for a place to rest, if only for a night. He lowered the rifle, though his hands still shook. His voice, when it came, was rough from disuse. You know what you're a skin. If folks hear I've taken you in, there'll be hell to pay. Nayeli's eyes did not waver. Hell has followed us already. What is one more night of it? Behind her, Zoltana shivered in the cooling air. Ayoka coughed into her sleeve. Jed's throat tightened. He remembered another winter, long ago, when he had begged a stranger for shelter and been turned away. He had survived, but the memory of that closed door never left him. The desert wind pressed against his back, urging him toward a choice. He could send them away, keep his silence intact, remain untouched by their suffering. Or he could open the door, knowing it would shatter the fragile walls he had built around his solitude. His hand reached for the latch. The women watched, their breaths caught. The silence stretched, thick with possibility. Jed's pulse hammered like a drum in his chest. And then, slowly, as though lifting a burden heavier than any he had carried in battle, he pulled the door wide. "Come in," he said. For the first time in years, the threshold of Jedediah Boone's home was crossed by footsteps not his own. Shadows and firelight mingled as the 5 widows stepped inside, carrying with them not only their grief but the faintest glimmer of something else, something Jed had long thought lost. Hope. He closed the door against the wind, and in the hush that followed, he knew nothing would ever be the same again.